Great. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you Pam, Eileen, Valerie, and all the other organizers of these discussions. So again, my name is Arthur Stamoulis. I'm Executive Director of Citizens Trade Campaign. We've been bringing groups together to work on the TPP since 2008, when the Bush administration first announced that it would be entering the TPP negotiations. And at first, we were doing our best to make this a good agreement. We were explaining to negotiators what we wanted to see on a whole range of issues, on what we thought had been bad in past trade agreements, and really, seeing this as an opportunity to create a new model for international trade. Since it became clear that that's not what we were going to get, we've been actively working to defeat it. And so Citizens Trade Campaign, was one of the groups that organized cross-sector demonstrations at all the formal negotiating rounds in the United States. We were the first to publish leaked TPP text anywhere, including the intellectual property chapter, the investment chapter, others. And we've got on-the-ground coalitions in 10 states working to educate and mobilize all sorts of constituencies around the TPP, and we've supported, beyond those 10 states, close to 2,000 organizations across the country in getting involved in this issue. And let me just see here. There we go. And so I'm going to start my presentation today by reviewing why the TPP is a bad deal for the majority of people here in the United States and around the globe. I'll then discuss, where the TPP is right now in the political process, and then perhaps most importantly, I'm going to talk about what you can do to help stop the TPP. But before I do that, let me just start by stating unequivocally that we can win this battle. People's movements have a long history of defeating corporate power grabs that are disguised as trade agreements. We don't always recognize and celebrate that history, but there is a very solid track record. So, since the late 1990s, people's movements have defeated the Multilateral Agreement on Investment. We defeated the so-called Millennial Round of expansion at the World Trade Organization. We defeated the Free Trade Area of the Americas. And today we're very well positioned to defeat the TPP. And I'm going to come back to this point at the end, but before I get into all the doom and gloom about, how awful the TPP would be if it were enacted, I think it's important to just keep in our heads that by working together, we absolutely have the power to stop this thing. The TPP is not preordained in any way. So just let's start with what the TPP is. I think many of you know the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a proposed trade and investment pact between the United States and 11 other countries throughout the Pacific Rim. There are Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Just among these dozen countries, the TPP would set rules governing approximately 40% of the global economy, making this a huge agreement. I mean, one that dwarfs NAFTA, CAFTA, many of the bilateral free trade agreements that the U.S. has passed in recent decades. Beyond that, unlike NAFTA, CAFTA, and the bilaterals, the TPP also contains what's called the docking mechanism, meaning that other countries would be able to join over time. And so a bunch, including Taiwan, Colombia, the Philippines, China, many others, have already expressed at least some interest in potentially joining the TPP in the future. And because of this docking mechanism, a lot of people have said that the TPP, along with a similar trade agreement that's currently under negotiation between the United States and Europe, could become one of the U.S.'s last trade agreements. In other words, rather than to negotiate new trade agreements with additional countries, from scratch. If the TPP were enacted in the future, the U.S. would likely just pressure countries to join onto this one. So, just a quick word on the process of how the TPP was negotiated. I think many of you know this, but from the start of the negotiations, which started in earnest in 2010, through late last year, a period of over 6 years, the TPP was negotiated completely in secret, meaning that the public was barred from knowing what negotiators were proposing in our names. And while the public and the press were shut out of the process, U.S. negotiators did grant hundreds of corporate lobbyists and a handful of others special cleared advisor status that provided them access to TPP texts and to the negotiators themselves. And so while we didn't get to see any texts, you had representatives of Walmart, Chevron, Cargill, hundreds of other big corporations either literally writing portions of this agreement or at least looking over negotiators' shoulders and saying, no, don't do that, try this instead. And it was only after the negotiations were over, the final text was signed, and changes became all but impossible, that the public was finally able to see any official version of the text, which happened in November of last year. And just as an aside, I've got to add, this whole process that the TPP was negotiated under was a huge rollback in transparency from even the George W. Bush administration. President Bush published draft texts of his biggest trade proposals for public scrutiny. Even today in the European negotiations, the Europeans publish their proposals online for public scrutiny, and it's the U.S. negotiators that insist that their proposals and any composite texts remain secret. And so this is really the exact opposite of how public policy should be created in a democracy. But at any rate, as you might expect from this type of process, what the finally revealed TPP texts show us is a trade agreement that's written to benefit a handful of very well-connected corporate interest groups with big potential downsides for almost everybody else. So what do I mean by that? The main thing we're hearing about the TPP in the United States during the election cycle is that it's bad for jobs, and that is absolutely true. The TPP would pit American workers into much more direct competition with workers in countries like Vietnam who earn less than 65 cents an hour. The United States has lost literally millions of jobs under past trade policies, and the TPP would absolutely accelerate that job loss. In addition to just costing jobs, it would also put a very real downward pressure on the wages and benefits of the jobs that are left. One study put that downward pressure from existing trade agreements at a cost of more than $3,500 per year for a worker earning the median U.S. annual wage of $35,540. So that's real money out of working families' pockets going into the pockets of big corporations. And of course, it's not just American workers who are hurt by this dynamic. Industry groups throughout Mexico, Central America, they've been warning that they're likely to lose work to Asia as a result of this pact. In fact, Vietnam's average minimum wage is just a third of that found in China's manufacturing centers. So Chinese workers could see a downward pressure on their wages under this agreement as well, as employers are saying, gee, we'd like to give you a raise, but we're now competing with workers in Vietnam and Malaysia who get paid far less than you do. And so, the global race to the bottom really does affect workers globally. Now U.S. negotiators, what they would say is, hey, the TPP has an entire labor chapter that's going to improve workers' rights and lift standards throughout all the TPP nations. But if you ask actual labor groups what they think, they've been unanimous in saying that the TPP's labor chapter is completely inadequate to the challenge of protecting jobs here at home or human rights abroad. And even if it were much, much stronger, the TPP was also negotiated in a way that allows importers to get around any labor any labor obligation. So the TPP is actually weaker than NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, on what's called rules of origin, meaning that a product like, say, a car that's assembled in a TPP country but primarily made out of parts from third-party countries, countries with no labor, environmental, or reciprocal market access obligations under the TPP whatsoever, those products can still enter the U.S. duty-free. So in other words, the engine, the glass, the wheels, the bumpers, all these parts of a car can be made in a third-party country, and if it's assembled in a TPP country, you can then enter the United States duty-free. So this is bad for workers. Another area where the TPP is even weaker than past trade agreements is on the environment. Trade agreements negotiated by the George W. Bush administration required countries to adopt, maintain, and implement 7 core environmental treaties. The TPP trims down that list of 7 environmental treaties during the Bush-era trade deals to just 1 of those 7. On top of that, the TPP would obligate the United States to automatically find that any natural gas exports to other TPP countries are in the U.S. national interest. It would waive economic and environmental reviews that are currently required for export projects under the U.S. Natural Gas Act. And that includes exports going to Japan, which is the largest importer of liquefied natural gas in the world, and frankly, which pays a lot more than we do in the United States for natural gas. So exporters are salivating for this deal, and experts have warned that this provision of the TPP alone could simultaneously lead to more fracking here in the United States and also higher energy prices for U.S. producers and consumers. Now, TPP boosters will point out that the TPP includes new conservation language, and that's true. But most of that conservation language is exceptionally weak. And to cite a couple of examples, rather than requiring that countries, say, abide by international fishery management programs, what the TPP actually requires is that countries endeavor not to undermine those programs. Not abide by these programs, endeavor not to undermine them. That's what the TPP text requires. Rather than banning commercial whaling, commercial shark finning, the TPP includes an optional list of conservation measures that countries should take, but they're not required to take them. And then elsewhere in the pact, it actually reduces tariffs on whale meat and shark fins in countries that actually import those products. And so, whalers and shark finners get a tax cut under the agreement. And these are just a couple of examples, and it's why environmental groups from Sierra Club to Greenpeace to NRDC to Defenders of Wildlife, among many, many others, have all voiced strong opposition to the TPP. And I'm going to give another reason why environmental groups are fighting this agreement in a second. Quickly, the TPP is also bad for public health. The TPP's intellectual property chapter, in a variety of ways, allows pharmaceutical companies to extend the length of medicine patents, meaning additional years of time before low-cost generic medications can enter the market. This is an issue that's gotten the most attention in terms of so-called biologic medicines, which are used to treat cancer and other diseases. But it's not just cancer. It's really anything you can take medicine for that's going to be affected. And what this could mean is higher medicine prices here in the United States, where frankly, our intellectual property rights for drug companies are already pretty extreme. So, it would lock in those rules here. But it's especially damaging in poorer countries where people need access to generic medications to survive. If you look at a disease like HIV, a patented medication can easily cost over $10,000 per patient per year. When the patent runs out, the price can fall as low as $100 per patient per year. That's a big difference here in the U.S., but it's the difference between life and death in a country with a per capita income of just over $5,000 per year, as some of our TPP partners have. And so the Nobel Peace Prize winning group Doctors Without Borders has called the TPP the most harmful trade pact for access to medicines ever. And then finally, the TPP is also bad for democracy. And so in addition to making it easier for corporations to ship jobs around the globe to whoever labors the most exploited and environmental regulations are the weakest, the TPP would also significantly limit government's public policy making space to address a wide range of issues. And so, I just mentioned how it does this in terms of intellectual property decisions. The TPP says you need to grant patents for medicines, you need to provide patent extensions for new uses of old medicines, you need to provide data and market exclusivity for biologics, and so on. And those were decisions that were once in countries' hands. Countries can make those decisions on their own. And now, under the TPP, if enacted, if a country wants to, take certain obvious steps to lower medicine prices, its hands are tied. But it's not just intellectual property. The TPP also limits government's decisions in terms of public procurement. In other words, countries can no longer preference the use of stimulus dollars or other taxpayer funds to create jobs locally. In other words, no more buy local government purchasing preferences that keep taxpayer money circulating in local economies. Under the TPP, countries are required to treat bidders for federal government contracts from any TPP country as if they were local. And that's a huge advantage, obviously, for massive transnational corporations over small local businesses. Depending on how the text is interpreted, the TPP may also block buy green or buy sweat-free or other types of government purchasing preferences. I'll say the TPP also has a whole chapter on financial regulatory decisions. So say you want to head off too big to fail by reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act, separating commercial banks from investment banks. Well, under the TPP, that's no longer a country's decision. A country wants to ban the sale of a certain toxic derivative. That's no longer the country's decision. There's an entire chapter covering sanitary and phytosanitary standards. In other words, food safety regulations. Other chapters have requirements covering product labeling. There are still other chapters on telecommunications, textiles, e-commerce, and more. And all of this, unlike your typical environmental treaty or human rights convention or non-proliferation agreement, unlike those types of international pacts, our modern trade agreements actually have very strong enforcement mechanisms built into them to ensure that when governments obligate themselves to tie their hands in these areas, that's actually happening. And so one of the TPP's chapters, the investment chapter, says that any transnational corporation that's based in a TPP country and feels that another TPP country has failed to conform to its TPP obligations can sue that country over the issue. Those suits aren't heard in the U.S. court system or any other country's domestic judicial system. Rather, they're heard by a panel of 3 private trade attorneys, most often at the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes at the World Bank. These tribunals, they can't literally force a country to overturn its laws, but what they can do is they can award judgments worth millions and in some instances even billions of dollars, so that if a country doesn't want additional suits brought against it on the same issue, it gets into line. This is a system called Investor-to-State Dispute Settlement, ISDS. Right now, the U.S. has a number of free trade agreements and bilateral investment treaties that contain ISDS, but with a couple of exceptions, those agreements are mainly between the United States and developing countries, such that U.S.-based corporations have traditionally used them to attack smaller countries' laws, but we haven't seen as much of foreign-based corporations using ISDS to attack U.S. laws. Now, expanding just that dynamic throughout the Pacific Rim, through the TPP would be bad enough. We don't want U.S.-based corporations dismantling consumer right-to-know laws or financial regulations or data privacy requirements or any of that, in Malaysia or New Zealand or elsewhere, for instance. But because the TPP includes a number of big, relatively rich capital exporting countries like Japan, like Australia, as does, by the way, the proposed trade agreement with Europe, which is looking to come in on the TPP's coattails. Because of that, the chickens could start to come home to roost. U.S. laws could suddenly find themselves under attack under the TPP. And so already under a much, much smaller trade deal than the TPP, NAFTA, the Canadian firm TransCanada is currently threatening to sue the U.S. for $15 billion in lost expected profits because the Obama administration decided not to approve its application for the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, some observers are saying that TransCanada might very well win this case. Even if they don't, the United States is likely to spend millions and millions of dollars defending against it. And this is the type of suit that would become much more common if the TPP moves forward. The TPP would overnight double the number of transnational corporations that have access to ISDS in terms of challenging U.S. laws, and the European agreement would compound that even further. Now, I'll say, over the years, the United States has already lost multiple cases under what's called state-to-state dispute settlement. So cases brought against us under trade agreements by foreign governments have been, fairly common over the years, and those are things that we've lost. We've lost cases pertaining to the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, tobacco controls, internet gambling. Just this December, Congress voted to repeal country of origin labels for meat products after the WTO ruled that they were a barrier to trade and said that they were going to start imposing $1 billion a year in penalties against us. So our country of origin labels on meat products are now gone. And, well, the TPP also includes this state-to-state dispute resolution. But again, it goes even further than that, further than the WTO, by granting individual corporations the power to bring suits against us. And so, just to summarize here, the TPP is a very bad deal. It poses a lot of significant risks to working families, to the environment, to public health, to our democratic policymaking space. And in terms of the TPP's supposed benefits, it's worth noting even the TPP proponents' rosiest projections about the pact show only really pretty modest economic gain from the agreement. According to the proponents' own study, U.S. GDP would be as high on March 15th, 2030 without the TPP as it would be on January 1st, 2030 with the TPP. And again, this is a projection that's based on all sorts of unlikely assumptions, including full employment, neutral trade balances, and static income inequality. If you remove those pretty ridiculous assumptions, the slight benefits that boosters are predicting for the TPP would become significant losses. So, that's in a nutshell why this is a bad deal. Let's talk about where things stand with the TPP right now. The administration signed the TPP back in November, but it still needs to be voted on and approved by Congress before it can be enacted. Under procedural rules called fast track, the President could submit the TPP to Congress at any time, and then fast track is required to take an up or down vote. No amendments, no filibuster, no other procedural shenanigans. They have to vote on it. And that procedure puts a lot of power in the administration's hands, but it's also something of a double-edged sword. Once the TPP is submitted to Congress, a vote has to happen. And as such, the administration isn't likely to send the TPP to Congress unless it's confident that it has the votes lined up to win. Otherwise, they send it to Congress and they risk Congress, either stripping fast-track rules from the agreement or voting down the pact entirely. And so, thanks to the amazing work of many people, in this webinar and across the country, the TPP and trade agreements in general are now so politically toxic that it's extremely unlikely that the TPP is going to be voted on before the election. Members of Congress know voters really hate these trade-killing job agreements, these trade-killing trade deals. Presidential candidates, Clinton, Sanders, Trump, they're all on the record opposing the TPP. Republican leaders have flat out stated they don't want to vote on the TPP before the election. And so now what the TPP boosters are talking about is holding a vote after the election during the lame duck session. That unique moment in the political calendar when Congress's accountability to constituents is at its absolute lowest. Lame duck is a period when you've got some members of Congress who were just voted out of office and they're looking for lobbying jobs, frankly, and they aren't feeling particularly accountable to what the voters back home want them to do, especially given that they were just voted out by those voters. At the same time, you've got members of Congress who are reelected and feeling good and looking for ways to give back and to thank their corporate donors, and who are making the calculation that look, anything we do in November and December, voters aren't going to remember 2 years from now when I have to face them again. So lame duck is a very dangerous time for us, and TPP supporters know that the lame duck session is really their only moment to get the TPP through, any time in the near future. Even if boosters think they can convince a Hillary Clinton or a Donald Trump to go back on their word, and pick up and support the TPP after they're elected, both those candidates are on the record about demanding certain changes to the TPP text. TPP negotiations, unlike a bilateral, are between, in this instance, 12 countries. And, once you start asking other countries to make changes, they're going to start demanding changes. And the whole house of cards that the TPP is built on, could fall apart. So boosters know, this is really their last good shot of getting the TPP done anywhere in the near future. And so as a result of that, we've now got President Obama himself signing op-eds in key areas throughout the country, talking about how the TPP is going to be great for the economy. We've got members of the administration constantly touring the country, giving speeches about how the TPP is going to be great for this city or that city, trying to quietly line up congressional votes. We've got the Chamber of Commerce and a slew of other corporate lobby groups joining forces in the U.S. coalition for TPP. They're doing constant fly-ins to D.C., bringing in their members to lobby Congress, in addition to the obvious fleets of, everyday lobbyists they've got in D.C. They've actually got a big sign-on letter to Congress that I'm expecting will probably come out next week. They've also got paid ads going in targeted districts too. And so, this is a time where we need to be pushing back. And we can't wait until the lame duck session reaches us. Oftentimes groups will, that are sort of casually interested in stopping the TPP, they'll tell me, we know that let us know, in other words, let us know when a vote is scheduled, and that's when we're going to mobilize our members. That is a losing proposition. As I've said, the White House, if the White House submits the TPP for a vote, we'll obviously keep fighting it to the bitter end, but that act of introducing the TPP for a vote to Congress is a pretty strong sign that we've already lost, that the administration is convinced they've got the votes to win. And so, our opponents right now are doing all their lobbying, they're doing all their cajoling, they're doing their vote counting to make sure that there can be a lame duck that they can win. And so now is the time we need to be pushing back to make sure they're not successful. The decisions in this fight aren't going to be made in November. They're going to be made, now through the fall. So the main thing we need to be doing right now is locking down members of the U.S. House of Representatives against the TPP. By all means, please contact your senators too, but where this issue is going to be won or lost is in the House of Representatives. I'm going to leave it to you to decide how, as faith leaders, you can best do that. But let me give you at least a few ideas. First, if you haven't recently, please go in and speak with your House member directly and ask them to oppose the TPP. The Memorial Day recess for House members goes from May 27th to June 6th. Then there's a 4-day weekend for House members in mid-June. Then again, June 25th through July 4th, there's the Independence Day recess. Most members of Congress are going to be spending a good chunk of time over the next 2 months back home in district. And so, it's a good time to pull together a couple of people, call the local district office, ask if the Congress member is on record against the TPP yet, and if they don't give you an immediate yes, say you'd like to schedule a meeting with your representative about the TPP for his or her, first available time slot. If you get a meeting or you can't get a meeting for a couple of months, another thing you can do is check out the members' website, their social media feeds, see if they have any public town hall events when they're back in district during the recesses. It's a great time where you and others can go and ask them publicly about the TPP. And I'll say, if your representative is a Democrat, a good question might be, Hillary Clinton has said the TPP isn't good enough on jobs, public health, and the environment. Do you agree with her? Just put them on the spot that way. And then finally, regardless of any meetings or public questioning, you can always just call or ask others to call the Congress member's office, leave a message asking him or her to oppose the TPP, and have someone get back to you with their decision on the issue. So my last slide, just along these lines, the one other thing I'll mention is that at CTC, we often have template email action alerts that we offer groups, edit however you like, put your name on it, send it out to your members. On Wednesday, we're expecting the U.S. International Trade Commission to issue its big report on the TPP. They're sure to highlight the positive findings and bury the negative ones. That's their standard operating procedure. So we'll have a template alert about that next week. At some point soon, we expect to circulate an alert calling on Democratic House Leader Nancy Pelosi to join others in publicly opposing a lame duck vote on the TPP. If anyone's interested in those types of items, just let me know. My email address is on the screen. I'll also mention that this summer there's going to be an anti-TPP roadshow with press events, rallies going up and down the West Coast. And then nationally, there's also going to be an anti-TPP concert series with Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello and a bunch of other artists. So, if you're interested in announcements on either of those, sign up for our email list at citizenstrade.org or follow us on Twitter at citizenstrade, and we'll make sure you get that information. The important thing is that all of us continue contacting our House members, continue encouraging others to do so, and if we're doing that, we keep the pressure steady, we're absolutely poised to win this fight. So let me just pause there. Thank everyone again for your work on this, and I guess see if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you, Arthur. Very informative and wonderful overview of all of the issues that concern us. Let's open it up now to any questions. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat box message area, and then we can read those off. We can try and unmute people, but that sometimes doesn't always work, so we have this as another means for hearing what folks are interested in.
Pam, we have a question from Karen Wilson, and I'm going to attempt to unmute her. Let's see. Karen, are you there?
I think so.
Okay.
My question is, Arthur, you had talked about President Obama has people going out promoting the TPP about it being good for jobs and everything. Is there any way that we know when or where this is happening so we can go protest?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So generally, we'll get word, usually a couple days in advance, unfortunately.
Okay.
We won't find out weeks in advance. Mm-hmm. And so when we do, we do our best to organize an on-the-ground protest like you're suggesting, or, if it's too late, if we're just finding out hours in advance, we try to at least get, a press release out, with some of the local opposition voices. And then obviously in the follow-up, try to get letters to the editor and stuff like that in response to any coverage. So if folks, are interested, let me know. I can connect you with some of our local sort of on-the-ground campaigns. But unfortunately, we don't get a ton of advance notice. They're a little wise to us.
I'm sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Any other questions?
Let's see. Brad Hester has a question. Brad, I'm unmuting you to see if you can speak.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I just typed in, one of our participants here, we're at Montclair Presbyterian Church, several people are here. Nancy Morton is asking that other than the corporations like Walmart or whatever that were involved in this negotiation, who were the advisors to this committee?
Yeah, so the lion's share were corporate lobbyists representing either individual corporations or industry groups, representing an entire sector of corporations. There were a handful of other advisors. So there were a couple of environmental advisors. There were a number of local elected officials who were advisors. And then separate from that, there's an entire labor advisory committee which had a few dozen labor officials as advisors. The issue with the labor advisory committee was they were basically segregated from the other committees, and so they would write reports and share information with the U.S. negotiators, and they were basically ignored and blocked from receiving a lot of information that they that we speculate other advisory committees received. But anyways, mostly corporations. And there is a list online. If someone, if anyone's interested, you can email me at that address, and I can send you the complete list of advisors. There's about close to 600 of them.
Thank you.
See, does anybody else have a question? I personally have a question, Arthur. So you talked a little bit about the election season and everything, and I'm just wondering kind of what the real impact has been on the movement to stop the TPP, of having someone like Donald Trump, for example, who's obviously getting all of the media coverage, to be so out front in saying that TPP would be a deal that's going to kill American jobs, for example.
Well, I mean, certainly having Trump and Sanders being really out front in voicing opposition to the TPP has been huge, and it's certainly, you know, I believe moved Secretary Clinton to the left, you know, in terms of voicing her opposition to the TPP in a big way as well. You know, obviously our reasons for opposing the TPP are quite different than Donald Trump's reasons for opposing the TPP. You know, when you get beyond the superficial, you know, we don't want to lose jobs is sort of the only issue there. You know, like how do we stop from losing jobs? We have pretty significant differences. But him, you know, speaking out, you know, so strongly on this issue, you know, has definitely given a lot of cover to, you know, more right-wing Republicans to buck their party leadership in opposing it. And, you know, it's made it harder for any sort of Republican to support this. And, you know, from my view, unfortunately, you know, Republicans are still in the majority in Congress. So we need Republican votes in addition to all the Democratic votes we're lining up against this. And having, you know, the Republicans' presumptive presidential candidate being so loud against that definitely helps us. And simultaneously, you know, having Sanders and in particular Clinton speaking out also helps us. You know, it helps toxify the TPP overall, and it helps, you know, give cover to Democrats who were, you know, hesitant to buck, you know, President Obama when President Obama is asking them to vote for it, you know, to be able to say, hey, look, you know, Secretary Clinton is saying this is a bad deal. All my base is saying this is a bad deal. I've got to go with them. So it has been incredibly helpful. You know, and I'll just say, I mean, the reason that you know, these political candidates are talking about this so much is that it's a winning issue. You know, polls show voters are really upset about these trade deals, and it's a lot of years of groundwork and, unfortunately, years of shared lived experience under previous pacts that have got us to this point.
Arthur, are there specific states, or what states and legislators that you might be aware of need the most action?
You know, that's a great question. You know, one thing that could be helpful, you know, if you guys have a list of coalitions where, you know, there's an active interest in the TPP, I'm absolutely, you know, can sort of give you offline sort of a rundown of, you know, where the members in those areas are. I will just say, you know, sort of broadly, you know, we're looking at the fast track vote from about a year ago as sort of a marker of where members of Congress stand on this issue. And so, you know, folks may remember, you know, we lost that vote by 5 votes. You know, since that time, at least 2 Republicans who voted for fast track are now very vocally and strongly opposed to the TPP. So, you know, the margin is even closer. So, you know, we need to be making sure that members who voted no on fast track remain no on the TPP, and we need to pick up a handful more votes. And so, you know, as CTC, you know, being labor, environmental, family farm organizations, and so on, we're focused more on the Democratic side of the aisle. You know, but work is going on both sides of the aisle. And, you know, we don't sort of publish, you know, the latest sort of target list and, you know, whip reports or anything like that. But if folks do have questions about their member, let me know, and I could give you an update.
Well, anyway, I have a feeling that a lot of you already know about this, but for those who aren't aware, we have the you know, the Office of Public Witness has a direct link to issues alerting, and these slides will be shared when we share the audio, so you can always go to that and click on the link. But the they have specific alerts that will allow you to directly contact your congressperson. So that's a good tool for us. And then just you know, continue to spread the word, telling your family members, your friends, and specifically, why is this a concern for us as people of faith? Write a letter to the editor, and as Arthur said, visit your member of Congress, find out where they stand. Also, you might want to invite a local speaker to come and speak to your congregation or preach on the issue, or, you know, do a Bible study on it. But find out if there are other organizations in your area that are working on this issue. And for those who haven't joined one of our hunger program trips, find out Eileen has information on trips that are coming up that are great opportunities to learn firsthand about these issues. So just a whole lot of things that we can do. I'll share this with the slides when we do, but there's also, I shared this back in January in our call, some good books and documentaries if you're looking for, you know, doing a Bible study or a movie night or something like that, a discussion group. There's some great resources on some of these issues, and that can go out with this presentation. And then I just want folks to mark your calendars for our next call, which will be June 23rd at 3 o'clock. And I wanted to kind of hear from folks about what would you like us to cover on the next call. We have a bunch of possibilities. We have speakers on healthcare, speakers on human rights, the environment, jobs and the economy, food safety. So those are some possibilities. And the other is maybe just having an open discussion with folks on how is this work going in your community? What ideas do you have? What has worked? What's not working? How can joining hands help to make this work more effective for you? So let's, are there any, anyone would like to share?
Pam,
Yeah.
Karen Wilson suggested that maybe Mark Strothman would be able to speak about the Peru trip that's coming up
Great.
in October. I'm not sure if, let me ask Mark. Mark?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
You kind of sound far away.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You want to know about the Peru trip coming up in October? We're going to be going to spend about a week in Peru. I think we leave October 15th. And Jed and I are trying something a little bit different. That's Jed Cobol, for those of you who don't know him. We're interested in trying to help participants learn how to be effective advocates when they come back home, and maybe even work with the Peruvian people, our Peruvian partners, on how we can be advocates together. So we're going to spend a day at the end of the trip around that idea. It's kind of an experiment to see if we can develop an effective way to get into that subject. But that will be the final day of the trip. We will be spending a few days in Lima and then going up into the mountains to the Sila Roya and talk to people in that area to learn about the effect of the what we're now calling the extractive industries, and to see how it relates to the issues we're talking about with TPP. I think most of you know that Doe Run is suing the Peruvian government around the issues of the environmental regulations under the Peru Free Trade Agreement, which would be similar to what would happen with the TPP free agreement. So that's what we're going to be doing. And if you want to learn more about it, you can contact me. My email's right there. That's about all I have.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So everybody, this flyer that you have on your screen can be downloaded. I'll show you the web address. The short address for this page is www.peaceusa.org/trips. We can send this out to folks too, but this is where we put up all of our reflection action trips we have going on. And so here's the one for Peru, and you download the flyer right here. So
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, could I add something? Just real
Any
quick.
other?
hey,
Go ahead.
Could I add something real quick? If you want an application, I can send you one.
Yes, go right.
Yeah, I was just going to say we're in the process of receiving applications. So, you know, contact me by email and I can send you an application.
thanks, Mark.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Any thoughts about our next call? What would you like us to focus on? What issues would you like to hear about? Any thoughts? Well then, I would like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Arthur and to Eileen for helping to make this possible and for your excellent presentation. We'll see you all next month then, June 23rd. Mark your calendars.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.